Hello, my name is Anthony Drago. 5,000 miles across the Pacific Ocean, that's just to the left of me, is the city of Hiroshima, Japan. Before World War II, it was a quiet and beautiful home to thousands of citizens that typified the Japanese culture. But on August 6, 1945, it was a scene of unbelievable horror, the site of the first atomic bomb ever to be dropped on the city. It was a turning point in history and also for my family. When the bomb exploded in the sky at 8:15 that morning, my family was beneath it. My family was part of an aristocratic class of Tsarist Russia. When the Civil War broke out, my grandfather, Kaleria Palchikoff, was a captain in the White Russian Army. My grandmother, Alexandria, and my infant mother, Kaleria, were with him as the White forces pushed across Russia to the port city of Vladivostok. Facing certain death with nowhere to flee, my grandfather led a band of White Russian officers who hijacked a cargo ship, eventually landing in Hiroshima, where they started new, peaceful lives, never dreaming of the nightmare that lay in front of them. My mother told me stories about this time and had numerous diary notes. I have wanted to tell her story for 30 years, which led me to collaborate with historian and author Douglas Wellman to create Surviving Hiroshima, a Young Woman's Story.
Having studied World War II for decades, it's really hard for me to express how excited I was when Anthony called me and told me the story of his family. His mother, Kaleria, was raised in both the Russian and Japanese cultures and also spoke perfect English. In that sense, her story is unique, but it also reflects the emotions of families around the world who were caught up in the biggest conflict of the 20th century. Her story is set in the political and military context of the times. Common people around the world found themselves caught up in a war over which they had no control, a war that saw the development of many new weapons, the most powerful of which were the two bombs which were unleashed over Japan. Few people survived the bombing to tell their stories, and perhaps no one told their story as eloquently as Kaleria. Relying on her diaries as well as transcripts of interviews which were conducted with her by the United States Army Air Force immediately after the war, this book is a first-person account of the bombing which has remained untold for 75 years.
On August 6, 1945, my mother, grandfather, grandmother, and Uncle David were preparing for breakfast. David was playing outside and came in to tell the family that a lone B-29 was flying overhead. He didn't finish his sentence. There was a blinding flash of light, and my family's house fell on them. But the explosion was not the end. In fact, for my family and thousands of others, it was just the beginning of a nightmare from which they could not escape. Not all of my family was in Hiroshima in 1945. My oldest uncle, Nikolai, had left for the United States just before the war broke out, intending to go to medical school. Instead, after Pearl Harbor, he joined the U.S. Army and was stationed in the Pacific, translating Japanese radio messages. On August 6th, he picked up a Japanese newscast that said that the city of Hiroshima had been completely destroyed. Devastated, he passed the transcript up his chain of command. They didn't believe him. Nothing like that could happen. After what seemed like an endless walk, my family found shelter in a sympathetic Japanese family. My mother volunteered at a Japanese field hospital that was overflowing with bomb victims. She treated the casualties as best she could, but eventually the horror overwhelmed her. Meanwhile, in one of the many miracles that have occurred in my family's history, Uncle Nikolai was assigned to be a translator on General MacArthur's staff at the surrender ceremony in Tokyo Harbor. He was given a 72-hour pass to return to Hiroshima and look for his family. In his hometown, a city he no longer recognized, He was reunited with my grandfather and family by the sheerest stroke of fate. My mother spent much of her adult life trying to forget August 6, 1945. But as the years went on, she realized her story and experiences are important to the historical record, as well as a warning to all who would consider to use these weapons. Surviving Hiroshima, a young woman's story, is an emotionally wrenching story that my mother wanted to forget. Yet, for the rest of us, it is a story that should never be forgotten.